Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The Basement That Froze Time. When my uncle passed away, he left behind an old Victorian house on the edge of town. It had been in our family for generations, a place with too many rooms and corridors that seemed to lead nowhere. Everyone avoided the basement. I had heard the whispers as a child, rumors from my cousins about how the air in the basement would turn icy cold no matter the season, and how clocks would stop working down there. At the time, I thought it was just one of those family myths passed around to scare kids. But when the house became mine, I had to decide whether to sell it or live in it. It was large, far too large for someone like me who lived alone, but it carried a strange allure. The first week went by uneventfully, though the house creaked in ways I couldn't get used to. It always sounded as if footsteps lingered just a few paces behind me. Still, I told myself it was only the house settling. The basement, though, that was different. It was on the third night, when I realized I had run out of boxes to unpack, that I decided to check it out. The door was old and stiff, its wood swollen with years of humidity. The lock was rusty, but gave way with enough force. The air that met me on the other side was sharp, colder than the February night outside, though the heating upstairs was working just fine. I flicked the switch, and the dim yellow bulb lit a narrow set of steps. I descended slowly, feeling that peculiar heaviness that sometimes presses down when you know you're about to do something you shouldn't. The basement floor was made of stone, uneven and cracked in places. That's when I noticed it. The wall clock nailed near the support beam. Its hands were frozen at exactly 2:17. I assumed it was broken, but when I pulled out my phone to check the time, the numbers on the screen began to flicker. The battery percentage, which had been at 65%, drained instantly to 0, and the phone shut off. I stood there, my breath visible in the air. The silence was immense, deeper than quiet. It was as though the sound of the world had been removed. My ears rang, not with tinnitus, but with a kind of pressure, as though I had stepped into a place where sound was not supposed to exist. I climbed back upstairs, shaken, and the moment I stepped through the basement door, the house's warmth returned, and my phone powered back on, showing the correct time again. I decided that was enough exploring. But the basement wasn't done with me. Over the next week, I started waking at 2:17 a.m. sharp every night. No matter when I went to bed, my eyes would snap open at that exact moment. And each time, I felt the air around me chill, even though the heater was running. The dreams began soon after. Dreams where I was standing in the basement again, staring at the frozen clock. In the dreams, though, there were figures, shapes that loomed in the shadows of the stone walls. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could hear the faint tick of clocks that didn't belong to mine, dozens of them echoing, then stopping all at once. By the 10th day, I knew I had to go back down. Curiosity was gnawing at me worse than fear. This time, I brought a lantern instead of relying on the old bulb. The moment I descended the steps, I felt the temperature plummet. My lantern flickered but held steady, and then I saw something new. On the far wall, the stone looked wrong, as if part of it had been replaced or patched over. The mortar was darker, fresher compared to the rest. I approached, lantern in hand, and as I touched the wall, I felt a pulse of freezing air rush through my palm. The clock above me ticked once, just once. The hands shifted, moving forward by a single second before stopping again. I stumbled back, terrified. My lantern dimmed, and in the corner of the room, I swore I saw a man standing. He was tall, dressed in what looked like old, dusty clothes from the early 1900s. His head tilted as though he were listening to something. I blinked, and he was gone. The next morning, I went to the town archives to look up records of the house. What I found made my stomach twist. In 1912, there had been a clockmaker who owned the property. His name was Elias Gray. He was obsessed with building clocks that could capture time. The neighbors reported strange noises at night, mechanical grinding, and screams muffled by the earth. Then one day he vanished without explanation. His workshop was never found. The patched wall in my basement suddenly made perfect sense. I returned one final time, not to explore, but to confirm what I feared. I brought a hammer and struck at the weak mortar. The stone cracked, and the sound echoed unnaturally long, as if it were reverberating inside a vast hollow. With a few more blows, I made a hole wide enough to see through. Behind the wall was a small chamber. Inside were dozens of clocks, stacked on shelves, their faces all frozen at different times. And there, slumped in a chair, was what remained of Elias Gray. His body was skeletal, but his hands were still clutching the frame of a half-built clock on the workbench. His jaw hung open in a silent scream. The moment my lantern light touched him, every single clock in the chamber ticked once. The air grew so cold I felt ice form in my lungs. My watch stopped, my lantern died, and in that pitch darkness, I heard a voice whisper directly into my ear, "You've wound it again." I don't remember climbing out. I woke up on the floor of the living room hours later, frostbite nipping at my fingertips. The basement door was wide open, and from the blackness below, I could still hear the faint tick of clocks starting and stopping. Now, every day at 2:17 a.m., all the clocks in my house, even the digital ones, pause for exactly 1 second. I've stopped going into the basement, but I know one day I'll have no choice. Because time, once frozen, is only waiting to be claimed again. Story 2, the forest clearing that trapped the air. I had always been a hiker, someone who found peace in the stillness of nature. The forest near my hometown was familiar to me, its trails winding through pine, oak, and birch, the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves clinging to the air. But one summer afternoon, I discovered something I wish I had never stumbled upon. A clearing that seemed to hold the air itself hostage, and me along with it. It began like any other hike. The sun was high, and cicadas buzzed lazily. I followed a narrow game trail I had never noticed before, curious about where it might lead. The path was faint, overgrown, but oddly straight, as if something had worn it down long before human feet ever found it. I pushed through branches and ducked under tangled vines until I emerged into a place that seemed untouched by time. The clearing wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across, perfectly round, as though it had been carved into the forest by an unseen hand. Grass grew evenly, too evenly, with no patches of dirt or weeds. The trees surrounding it formed a circle, their branches reaching inward but never crossing, like they were holding back. At first, I thought I had stumbled onto an old campsite, or maybe a forgotten meadow. But then, I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the invisible threshold, the temperature dropped. A chill washed over me so quickly I could see my breath, though it had been nearly 90 degrees outside. I froze, both from the cold and from the sudden awareness that something was deeply wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as though every sound had been swallowed. The buzzing cicadas? Gone. The rustling leaves? Silent. It was as if the clearing existed in a vacuum, sealed off from the rest of the world. Instinct told me to leave, but when I turned back, the trail behind me seemed farther away than it should have been. My legs felt sluggish, like I was moving through syrup. Every step toward the trees took twice the effort. That was when I heard it. A faint sound, not of birds or wind, but of breath. Slow, steady, exhaling from nowhere and everywhere at once. I spun around. The clearing was empty, of course, but the air moved strangely, rippling like heat waves, even though the cold clung to my skin. I called out, "Hello?" My voice didn't echo. It didn't even seem to leave my throat. It was as though the sound had been devoured. Panic set in. I ran to the edge of the clearing and tried to push through the wall of trees, but the moment I reached the border, my lungs tightened. I couldn't breathe, like the air itself refused to follow me out. I stumbled back to the center, gasping, my chest burning. The strange breath continued, now louder, like something was inhaling deeply as I struggled. I tried again, this time sprinting, but my vision blurred and the cold grew unbearable. My skin prickled, my fingers numb. I collapsed onto the grass, shivering. That's when I noticed something beneath the blades. The grass was too uniform because it wasn't growing naturally. It was covering something. I clawed at the soil until my nails bled, pulling up roots and dirt. And there, just below the surface, was stone. Smooth, gray stone arranged in a perfect circle, carved with lines I didn't understand. A sigil. An old one. The breath quickened. It wasn't just in the air now. It was in me, rattling through my lungs like something was trying to sync its rhythm with mine. My vision darkened at the edges. My instincts screamed that if I let it match my breathing, I would never leave. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself across the stone, clawing toward the faint outline of the trail. Every inch felt like dragging my body through ice water. My breath hitched, and for one terrible moment, I thought I had lost. But then my hand brushed the dirt beyond the circle. Warmth flooded back instantly. Sound returned. The cicadas screamed, leaves rustled, and I collapsed against the forest floor, gasping like I had been underwater. When I dared to look back, the clearing was still there, quiet and perfectly round. But I swear the air shimmered at its edges, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't stay to watch. I stumbled home, shaken and pale, and told no one for years. Even now, I sometimes wake in the night unable to breathe, my chest tight, my lungs refusing air until I sit upright, panicked and wheezing. On those nights, I remember the clearing, and I can almost hear it again, that steady, patient breath, waiting for me to return so it can finish what it started. Story 3, the old hospital corridor that never warmed. Hospitals are supposed to heal. They are designed to be sterile, bright, and full of movement, a place where life is both saved and sometimes lost, but never stagnant. Yet when Emma accepted the late shift custodial job at the abandoned Eastbrook Medical Center, she quickly learned that some parts of the hospital refused to follow the rules of time and reason. The hospital had been shuttered for nearly 20 years, its wards emptied, its equipment sold or scrapped. But the city had bought the property back, intending to redevelop it. For now, though, Emma's job was simple. Walk the halls with her flashlight, keep intruders out, and file a report of anything unusual. Most nights were uneventful. Dust-covered gurneys, faint echoes of dripping pipes, and the occasional bird trapped inside a broken window made up the landscape of her patrol. But there was one corridor, an impossibly long stretch on the third floor, that unsettled her every time she passed through it. It wasn't because of its appearance. In fact, compared to the collapsed ceilings and mold-streaked walls of the rest of the hospital, the corridor was eerily well-preserved. Its paint was dull but intact. The ceiling lights still hung neatly in a line overhead, though dead. What bothered Emma was the temperature. No matter the season, the corridor was always cold. Not the refreshing chill of an air-conditioned room, but a bone-deep frigidity that clung to her clothes and skin. Even in July, when the night air outside hovered around 80 degrees, her breath fogged faintly in that hallway. The first night she noticed it, she brushed it off as a draft. The second night, she brought a thermometer in her bag, curious. The rest of the hospital stayed around a humid 70, but the corridor held steady at 41 degrees. No vents blew air there, no broken windows ushered in the night breeze. It simply was cold, as though it carried its own climate. Emma's reports mentioned it casually, phrased in professional detachment. Unusual temperature variance in Corridor 3B. Recommend inspection. The supervisors ignored it. No one cared about the quirks of an old building. They only wanted her to prevent vandals from sneaking in. But the corridor was more than just cold. On her fourth week, she realized she wasn't alone in it. The sound came first, barely audible, like a shuffle of slippers against tile. She swung her flashlight down the hall. Nothing. The beam caught nothing but an endless stretch of pale green walls and doorways sealed shut with chains. The noise returned on the sixth week, closer this time. A dragging shuffle, accompanied by a faint wheeze, as though someone were struggling to breathe. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat, the thermometer she carried reading an impossible 34 degrees. She called out, "Who's there?" Silence. The air seemed to tighten. The corridor's length stretched out in her perception, as though it would never end. The cold seeped through her gloves and jacket, numbing her fingertips. She left that night without finishing her sweep. By the time she returned for the next shift, Emma had convinced herself it was nerves. An empty hospital could play tricks on the mind. Yet when she entered the corridor again, the cold welcomed her like an unwelcome hand pressed to her spine. She forced herself to walk, her footsteps echoing too loudly. That was when she noticed the condensation. Her flashlight beam revealed small patches of frost clinging to the walls, patterns like veins spreading outward. In the center of the corridor, one patch had grown so thick it resembled a handprint pressed firmly into the wall. Emma staggered back, heart hammering. The shape was too precise, too human. She reported it again, this time more urgently. Unexplained frost formation in 3B corridor. Strong recommendation for inspection. Her supervisor chuckled when he read it aloud. You're just spooking yourself. It's an old building, probably bad insulation. But insulation didn't explain what happened on her next patrol. She had nearly finished walking the corridor when the lights above her, lights that had been dead for decades, flickered on. One by one, in sequence, stretching into the distance. They revealed something she had never noticed, the shadows of figures standing in the doorways on either side. Her breath froze in her lungs. There were dozens of them, thin, gaunt shapes, their features indistinct, but their heads all turned toward her in unison. She stumbled backward, her flashlight shaking wildly. The lights blinked out, plunging the hall back into darkness. Emma bolted. She didn't stop running until she was outside, gasping in the warm night air. She told no one. Not her supervisors, not her family. Who would believe her? But the next night, she didn't show up for her shift, nor the night after. When the city finally sent another guard to replace her, he lasted exactly 2 nights before resigning without explanation. His notes, brief and scrawled, were left behind in the logbook. The corridor never warms. They're still there. The redevelopment project stalled. Contractors refused to work on that floor, claiming their tools iced over or their breath came out in visible clouds. The city eventually gave up, sealing off the hospital entirely. To this day, the Eastbrook Medical Center stands abandoned, its windows boarded, its gates locked. But locals whisper about the corridor inside, the one that never warms. And those who claim to have broken in speak of hearing soft shuffles, labored breaths, and a frozen handprint still pressed into the wall, waiting for the next unlucky soul to walk through. Story 4, the motel room corner that held you still. The night Evelyn checked into the roadside motel, she already felt uneasy. She was traveling alone, driving across state lines after her aunt's funeral, and exhaustion had forced her to stop in a small town she had never heard of before. The motel looked ordinary enough from the outside. Faded neon sign, cracked asphalt parking lot, rows of identical beige doors. It was the kind of place no one remembered after leaving. The man at the desk hardly spoke. He slid a key across the counter, muttering the room number. When she walked across the dimly lit lot, she noticed most of the rooms were dark, curtains pulled tight. Only a few yellow bulbs flickered against the night air. Evelyn thought she saw someone standing in the shadows at the far end of the lot, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. Her room was small and stale, the air smelling faintly of mildew and something metallic. The carpet was worn thin in the center, and the walls were the color of old bone. Still, she locked the door, dropped her bag on the bed, and told herself she just needed one night of rest. That's when she noticed the corner. At first, it was nothing. Just the far left corner of the room where 2 walls met. But the shadows there were darker, thicker somehow, as if the dim lamp didn't quite reach it. Evelyn stared for a moment too long, then shook her head. Just fatigue. She turned on the TV for background noise, changed into an old t-shirt, and tried to settle in. Around midnight, she woke suddenly. Not from a noise, but from the feeling that something was watching her. Her eyes opened to the same dimly lit room, and her gaze slid immediately to the corner. She couldn't stop herself. The shadows seemed deeper now, like a pool of ink spreading upward. A low hum vibrated through the air, not from the TV, which had shut itself off, but from the corner itself. Evelyn sat up, frozen, her breath quickening. She tried to move, to reach for her phone, but her body wouldn't respond. Her arms felt pinned to her sides, her legs locked beneath the sheets. The hum grew louder, reverberating through her chest like the bass of some enormous drum. The corner seemed to pulse with it, as though the darkness itself was alive. Minutes or hours passed. She couldn't tell. Evelyn's eyes watered from the effort of staring. Every instinct screamed at her to look away, but she couldn't. The hum wrapped around her like invisible chains, holding her still. The harder she fought, the tighter the grip became, pressing her deeper into the mattress. At some point, her vision blurred. In the shadowed corner, shapes began to emerge, vague outlines of figures, overlapping, shifting. Some were tall and narrow, others bent and crawling. They moved without sound, except for the ceaseless hum that came from their midst. Faces, half-formed, flickered in and out, eyes too wide, mouths stretched too long. She wanted to scream. Her throat burned with the effort, but no sound came out. She realized with horror that she wasn't just paralyzed, she was being drained. Her voice, her strength, her will being pulled into that corner. The air grew cold. Frost bloomed along the edges of the wallpaper, crystallizing on the lamp. Her breath misted before her, shallow and fast. Evelyn thought she might die there, locked in place by whatever ancient hunger lived in that corner. But then, without warning, it stopped. The hum collapsed into silence, the shadows thinned, and she could suddenly move again. Gasping, she sat up, clutching her chest. The corner looked normal, just paint, wall, shadow. Her body shook violently, but she managed to grab her bag and rush out of the room, barefoot and fumbling with the door chain. The night air outside was a shock of freedom. She sprinted across the lot to her car, ignoring the desk clerk's confused glance through the window. She drove until dawn, until the motel was miles behind her, not daring to stop. Later, at a gas station, she dared to check her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her skin was pale, her lips blue, as though she'd been left in a freezer. But the worst part was her eyes. In the whites, just faintly, were thin lines of gray, webbing outward like cracks. They hadn't been there before. Evelyn never spoke of the motel again. She burned the receipt, avoided that stretch of highway forever, and told herself it had only been exhaustion playing tricks on her. But sometimes, at night, when she lay awake, she felt it return, the hum, faint and distant, tugging at her bones. And when she closed her eyes, she always saw that corner. When the air turns cold for no reason and refuses to let you move, it leaves more than just a shiver. It leaves questions about what lingers in the places we think are safe. If these stories chilled you, remember, sometimes the cold isn't just in the air. Sometimes it's waiting for you.